Good afternoon to everyone. We are starting this event. A warm welcome from the Open University of Israel to our distinguished speakers, to our participants from Israel and abroad. I think the numbers are still increasing momentarily, so we'll probably have still some people joining us in the next few minutes. We are really delighted to host this webinar on the external relations of the EU Green Deal and circular economy, and to provide a platform for discussing the possible ramifications on EU-Israel relations and Israel's economy and industry. We're holding this event just 2 days before Earth Day. This year, Earth Day comes at a very pivotal period that has proven a crucial connection between people and the planet. We face interrelated challenges of global health pandemic, economic downturn, and accelerated biodiversity loss, and unfortunately, the impacts of increasing global warming. These interrelated crises require a new way of operating our countries, economies, and businesses. On December 2019, just a short time before the COVID crisis hit the EU shores, the EU Commission announced a groundbreaking European Green Deal. This deal is leading the global effort to decouple economic growth from resource use and environmental degradation. The EU has been the first to commit to becoming climate neutral by 2050. The Green Deal investment plan is designed to mobilize at least 1 trillion euros of public and private investment over the next decade, out of it 500 billion euros from the EU's own budget. The plan is structured to support companies and businesses in becoming world leaders in clean and green technologies and products. To help reach the Green Deal objectives of lower resource consumption and less environmental impact, it has generated work on sustainable product policy, also accompanied by a circular economy policy. The sustainable product policy is expected to provide a legal framework which will apply to all products imported to the EU and will require them to comply with technical standards of sustainability. This provides one indication of the external ramifications of the EU Green Deal and its potential in serving as a catalyst for change beyond EU borders. Israel is beyond EU borders, but it is an associated country of the EU, not only a strategic ally, but also EU is Israel's largest trading partner. In 2020, 40% of Israel's imports were from the EU, and 31% of its exports were directed towards the EU, amounting to $13.8 billion just for the export side. Just as a point of comparison, for the same year, only 23% of Israel's exports were directed to the US, amounting to $10.3 billion. So therefore, we hope this event will help us here in Israel, but also maybe potentially globally, because I know we have some global participants as well, to clarify how the EU Green Deal and accompanying policies and implementation among EU member countries within the areas of climate change, resource use, and product responsibility and product sustainability are expected to impact these relations in ways that would require us to prepare and adjust our policies and businesses for bettering sustainable growth. So just before handing the floor to our speakers, I would like to ask our participants to send their comments and questions through the chat box. We will collect these and try to address them as much as possible at the panel discussion at the end of the event. Our first distinguished speaker is Mrs. Astrid Schumacher, Director of Global Sustainable Development at DG Environment, the EU Commission. She will provide us with an international perspective on the European Green Deal and circular economy agenda. Astrid, please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you very much, Or, and thank you for the perfect scene setter. You're making my job very easy. I think all the main messages I have, you have already put very clearly forward. I should also say, I realized late that I have quite a bit of time for the presentation, so I decided at the last moment to throw together a few slides. You just don't have to listen, but have also a little visual support as I go through and try and explain a bit how we situate the circular economy within the European Green Deal and what the European Green Deal means for the European Union. So you need to bear with me for just a second, and I hope you can now see my slide. Can you just confirm?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. I'm practicing this a bit still. So what I wanted to say at the outset, and you've said it very well, we have adopted the European Green Deal just before the COVID crisis hit. And at the time, we termed it very clearly as our new sustainable growth strategy. Since then, of course, virtually everything has changed. And we're now very pleased that we can also say that the European Green Deal is also guiding our recovery. Now, what is the European Green Deal and why am I saying that? Now the slides should change, do not change. Small problem, hold on. Yes, so as you can see on the slide, the European Green Deal is a very comprehensive policy. It's a Green Deal, so its primary objectives are environmental. It is about enabling us to be, as I was saying in the beginning, a carbon neutral continent by 2050. It's about decoupling resource use from environmental degradation and pollution. And crucially, it is also about preserving biodiversity. And it is our assumption and understanding that in order to achieve these objectives and address these really urgent planetary crises, we need to act in a systemic manner. And what we mean by that is that we do not address the downstream effects that we see. So we not tackle pollution only at the end of pipe. Of course, we also do it. But we really take several steps back and say, what is it that actually causes these environmental effects, the environmental degradation we're suffering from? And that brings us very quickly to consumption and production. So the way we produce, the way we consume, how much we produce and how much we consume. And in many ways, we have very recently seen a very good scientific underpinning of that when at the United Nations Environment Assembly number 5, the virtual first section of it in February, UNEP was releasing a new report called Making Peace with Nature. And what is so crucial about this report is that it is in a way a synthesis of syntheses. So it's the first report globally that puts together the various findings of the big international panels we're all familiar with, like the IPCC on climate change, IPBES for biodiversity, IRP looking at resources, but then also the emission gap report, the global environmental outlook. I think a total of 50 or so assessments put together. And the findings of this are that the crisis we are suffering from is a triple crisis: climate change, biodiversity, pollution. All three phenomena are linked, and all three of them can be traced back to the way we're dealing with our natural capital, to the way we produce and consume. So the circular economy, which you see circled on the screen in front of you, is for us part of a wider policy that is the European Green Deal, and that looks virtually at all sectors of economic activity and reforms them. So we're looking at energy policy, we're looking at agricultural policy with our farm to fork strategy, we're looking at energy policy, we're looking at, of course, climate policy, we're looking at mobility, and we're also looking at what we can do to project what we want to do globally. Now, why do we see such a need for action? I think there may be a little block on the screen, but crucially, we are consuming resources as if we had more than one planet at our disposal. And the trends are such that by 2050, in a business as usual scenario, the world would be consuming the resources as if we had 3 planets. So that is clearly not sustainable. I have put on screen a couple of, I find quite striking figures. First is to just look at the annual global extraction of materials, which has tripled from 1970 to 2017 and continues to grow exponentially. At the same time, and this is a figure from the International Resource Panel, the same panel has been looking at the impacts of that and has found that more than 90% of biodiversity loss and water stress come from resource extraction and processing. And also around 50% of climate change impacts are linked to resource extraction and processing. At the same time, this linear way of dealing with the world's resources has led us to a steady increase in waste generation. by 70% by 2050 with attendant costs. And all of that is dramatic in itself. And then we look at how much we're actually recycling, because the world has understood that this linear model is not the way to go. And then we find that even in the EU, which I believe can justly be called a bit of a front runner in this area, even in the EU, only 12% of the materials we use come from recycling. So in other words, the potential, the scope for action is actually quite vast. Now, I was saying in the beginning that we see the European Green Deal and the circular economy also as key to recovery. And in fact, we see the COVID crisis, for all its heartbreaking impacts aside and the trouble it is causing, we see it also as a chance to do better. We have seen how quickly and easily global supply chains can be disrupted. We can see how out of nothing jobs that were secure are no longer there. And we have also seen in a way that it is possible to do things differently. And we need to build on that experience, as we need to build on the fact that governments around the world are now putting together whatever resources they can come up with to really kickstart the recovery. And what we want is not a recovery of business as usual. What we want is what the UN Secretary General calls build back better, which for us means build back greener, build back in a way that we get rid of the industrial model that has basically put us in a situation of planetary crisis. Always to be remembered, the COVID crisis is here. There is a vaccine. We're finding a way of dealing with it. There is no vaccine against climate change or biodiversity loss. It means we really have to change ourselves, the way we act, and again, the way we produce and consume. The circular economy for us has a number of benefits. Clearly, the environmental ones. I work in the Environment Department of the European Commission. This is where we come from. We want less pollution, less climate change. We want to protect the natural resource base. But as we studied the circularity and its potential, and we had good support from academia and from international scientific institutions and think tanks, we also learned more and more that there is an emerging, I think a clear consensus for now, that through circularity, you can create local, good quality jobs. Your supply chains can become more resilient. In a way, you can, in many cases, you can keep them local, or you can control them better. You're not so much dependent on extracting new materials. There are new business opportunities. And in a way, it can also help the social cohesion inter areas through the creation of these local jobs, which are jobs at all levels. They're high-tech jobs, but they're also very basic jobs that we also need to have. Now, I will jump over this. This is just a little slide to underpin what I was said before, that the economies around the world are now kickstarting the recovery effort. And on this screen, I just put together what is happening in the EU, but I think that's not so super relevant. So I'm now going basically to what is perhaps my most important slide, and I would call it the Circular Economy Action Plan in a nutshell. So within the European Green Deal, I think I have mentioned already that the circular economy is one of the priority areas. There are two things we do about circular economy. We have a dedicated circular economy action plan. That's what you see on screen. And we also have the idea of mainstreaming circular economy through everything else we do. Now, if I start for a moment, not with what you see on screen, but say just a couple of words on the mainstreaming, because that's important. The Circular Economy Action Plan itself, here on screen, came out in March 2020, a couple of days before we went into lockdown. It was followed by a whole range of subsequent strategies. For example, a biodiversity strategy, which acknowledges the role of circularity. Circularity can play to help protect biodiversity. A farm-to-fork strategy that looks at circularity in the sector, for example, for the avoidance of food waste. A renovation wave, which is one of our key kickstart policies. So we really want to bring up the rate of renovation of buildings in the European Union, make them more energy efficient, at the same time save energy, reduce climate change emissions, but also bring in the circularity concept. So do it in a way that the materials that are being used, for example, are recycled materials. We've put out a chemical strategy for sustainability, that looks at chemical products to be safe and sustainable by design. And of course, very importantly, we have put in place a number of climate policy actions. The 2050 long-term strategy in our climate law that foresees climate neutrality by 2050, but also now a whole set of actions that will enable us to reduce our emissions already by 50% by 2030. And it is very clear that in order to achieve this, we need to factor in circularity into the game. And then there are a whole number of other sort of useful things to bear in mind. So for example, we've been looking at our skills strategies to make sure that we also have the right training in place for the new kind of jobs that are needed in the digital economy, but also in a circular economy. And we have the Circular Economy Action Plan that in a way pulls all this together and focuses specifically on making circularity happen. Now here I should say this is the second Circular Economy Action Plan we are putting forward. The first one we did in 2015, we had about 50 actions. They were completed and they set us on a road to make the circular thinking in the European Union the mainstream thinking in business. Now I don't want to pretend that every business in the European Union has gone circular, not at all. I showed you the 12% recycling rate in the beginning. But we are today in a completely different scenario from where we were in 2015, where we had a lot of opposition from the business sector when we told them that they needed to rethink their value chains and should focus on designing out waste, etc. Those were not ideas that were at all mainstream at the time. And now in 2020, when we came out with this new action plan, it was actually in many areas industry that came to us and said, we want to work with government, we want the right regulatory framework to help underpin our own efforts to go circular, because industry has realized a number of things. One is that consumers are quite interested in the footprint of companies. So it is good company policy to be able to say that they are mindful of their environmental impact, of the resources they use, the emissions that come from them. So that is helpful. But equally importantly, and that brings me back to the economic angle of the story I was mentioning in the beginning, has also become clear for companies that material cost for production is incredibly high. Supply chains are volatile, prices are volatile. And if you go circular, a lot of this you can keep under control better and you can use. Now, I said this is the circular economy in a nutshell. So 35 actions. If you look at the left side of the screen, the whole value chain is what matters. So the whole looking from cradle to grave, if you want, from the production, from design to the waste phase. We then have 3 blocks in the middle of issues we want to focus on. And I will come to all of them briefly, but I will just mention them now. So it is about making sustainable products the norm in the EU. And Or said that in the beginning, I think that's the one takeaway to have from this. Sustainable products are supposed to be the norm on our market. We want to empower consumers and public buyers to play a role in that. And we also want to look at sustainable production processes. For that, we focus on a range of sectors that I've listed here, and I'll come back to most of them briefly. We've started with batteries. And we want to look at waste even more than we have before. We already have quite stringent waste legislation that foresees the separation of individual waste streams, that has waste targets, etc. We're having a second go at that. And this is in particular about really trying to do more to turn waste into a resource and making waste as a resource a secondary raw material, sounds better, and make these secondary raw materials more accepted on the market. And on the right side of the screen, very importantly, this is not something that can be done just by a string of legislation. It will happen. It sort of needs the whole, if you want, ecosystem around it. So we're looking at cities. We're looking at linking the discussion more with the climate change debate, also for international uptake. So when countries look at their national determined contributions, that they factor in more the contribution of circularity. It's about getting the economics right, so getting the prices right, polluter pays, extended producer responsibility. We're looking at financial markets. how we can make sure that we steer investment towards green and circular economy. There is still a lot of investment to be done also in research and innovation. And I'm saying that in particular to Israel. You are leading, of course, in this area. A lot of these new circular production models and processes still need to be invented. We need to invest very much in a global level playing field. Circular economy will not happen in the EU by itself and should not happen in the EU by itself. We're doing it to lower the environmental footprint of the European Union. But we are in the end just a small part of the planet and not the part that grows most rapidly. So it is really important that economies around the world, specifically emerging economies, take up the circular economy and make that part of their economic model as they move forward. And lastly, but importantly, sounds dry and boring, monitoring. So we will really only move forward if what we do is actually has good indicators, we measure progress, and if we see we're off track, we can take action to correct. So I've spent quite a lot of time on this slide. I will be a lot faster for the next slides, and I would say, or at some point, just give me a little signal 2 or 3 minutes before I should finish, so I can wrap up, because I can speak forever on this subject. So what I wanted to quickly highlight here is what to expect in 2021. So again, sustainable products should be the norm. So we're starting to roll out what we are calling a sustainable product policy framework, starting with the Sustainable Products Initiative. I come back to that. We're then going to have in the course of the year a number of legislative proposals to empower the consumer. We will start looking at a number of the sectors that I have mentioned in the beginning. So sectors with a high potential for circularity and also high potential to save emissions. We are revising our rules on waste shipments. That is an important aspect from the international angle. I think many of you will be aware that the EU and other developed economies have been exporting a lot of their waste. A lot of it went to China. China at some point a few years ago closed its market. That did not lead directly to an end of the shipping, but the shipping was done frequently to other parts of Southeast Asia, often to countries that were less well able or less equipped than China to do that. So it has become an environmental problem, but also a social issue. So we want to tighten our rules there. And we have started looking a bit at the international framework. Now in the environment area, many of you will know we have lots of multilateral environmental agreements. And we believe that also in the area of circularity, where we have none, we should start thinking about such agreements. And the first one that we are proponents of, together with over 100 other countries, is to have an international agreement for plastics. And we have also recently in February launched a global alliance on circular economy and resource efficiency. So now I've said it all very briefly, and the rest of it I will spend as much time as Ora is going to give me to go into a bit more detail on what I've said before. Starting with the Sustainable Products Initiative. Now, what is important here is to look at the figure on the right side in the box. Up to 80% of products' environmental impacts are determined in the design phase. In other words, the way you can design out waste, you can design out pollution, you can design products in such a way that they lend themselves more easily to circularity, so that they are more easily recyclable, repairable, etc. So after a lot of study of this subject, and bearing in mind that sustainable products should be the norm and not the exception, we are now working towards a legislative initiative for the European Union to ensure that products placed on our market become increasingly more sustainable. Now, we are in the beginning of this exercise. We call this an impact assessment process. We're just at the beginning of this. We have a model that we are looking at. That is the Eco-Design Directive. Some of you may be familiar with it. The Eco-Design Directive is looking currently at energy-intensive products, and we then have individual work plans that allow us to do design requirements for these products, from vacuum cleaners to whatnot. So this is the kind of model we could be looking at for our Sustainable Products Initiative. And what we say here still, via this directive or another instrument. So this we are looking at the best way of doing that, and we hope to be coming out with our proposal in the fourth quarter of this year. Now, what is it we want to achieve? The durability, reusability, upgradability, and repairability. I've been learning a few new words recently. This is what we would like our products to be like: durable, reusable, upgradable, repairable. We would like to avoid that hazardous chemicals are in products. We want products to have increasingly recycled content. So this is about the markets for secondary raw materials that I've mentioned before. We would like to look more and more at restricting single-use products. Obviously, there are some that have the justification nobody thinks of touching. In the age of COVID, let's think of vaccinations and things you need to inject. But there are many other single-use products that we have already legislated on. For example, single-use plastic cutlery and cups and forks and the like. Where really there is no need for them to be only single-use, and where viable and and not too costly alternatives exist. We also want to tackle a phenomenon consumers encounter from time to time: premature obsolescence. So you buy something and it breaks down rather more quickly than it should or than you would have expected. We want to incentivize product as a service. So that means that we want to look more and more at new business models, such as chemical leasing, for example, where a company would not be selling the cleaning product, for example, as a product, but would sell the service of, let's say, a clean factory, thereby having an interest as the company to use less of its product, and therefore having also a smaller environmental impact. And we really want to look at digitalization. Sorry. Clearly, we're in a sort of digital revolution, and we are just at the beginning to understand what are the possibilities that this offers us for our product policy. So here we're talking about a product passport, for example. And again, we're at the early stages, but this would enable us digitally to put together all relevant information about the product. Secondly, empowering consumers and public buyers. Important to begin maybe with the public buyers in the EU. 14% of purchasing power comes from the member states, 14%. So in other words, if the member states go green in their purchasing, they can have a very important effect on the market. They can pull the market into green direction. This is why we're looking at a proposal for mandatory green public procurement criteria, and we're also phasing in the idea of mandatory reporting on progress on green public procurement. But coming to private consumers, they as well should be able to play a role. And I'm saying here on purpose, should be able. This is not about shifting responsibility away from the producer to say it's the consumers that want these polluting products. The polluter is responsible, but the consumers need to be able to recognize, for example, what is a green product. So they need to receive trustworthy and relevant information on products at the point of sale, trustworthy, relevant, accessible. We are thinking of establishing a new right to repair. We are working on a new piece of legislation to ensure that companies substantiate their green claims. And we have a specific methodology how this is supposed to be done. And some of you may know, we also have something in eco-label. So these are the top 10, 20% of any product category that is within its scope that gets an eco-label as being particularly good, particularly green. And into these eco-label criteria, we will increasingly include the criteria I've mentioned before, so the criteria for circularity, such as recyclability, recycled content, etc. I have mentioned that we're looking at key product value chains. I've put them here on screen. Again, the ones that have a circle are the ones we're going to be focusing on, particularly this year. We have already come out at the end of last year with a new framework for batteries. No time to go into details, but I can do that if anybody has a question. This year, we will work further on plastics. We want to look at packaging. We want to look at textiles, electronics, and ICT. I give you here just on the screen an example of a circular electronics initiative. So this is about translating the sustainable products thinking and framework into specific sectors here at electronics. Again, important to know, only 40% of electronic waste is recycled. We all know that our little gadgets like mobile phones and others contain a lot of interesting materials, including rare earth materials. And they're very interesting figures that if you do mining from existing electronics, so if you take out the raw materials there for reuse, you can save obviously a lot of money and a lot of environmental footprint. It's so much easier to take the gold out of a telephone than to go gold ore mining somewhere in a national park, for example. So we're looking at this initiative in particular with a couple of interesting ideas, for example, introducing a common charger. I think all of us, we have like 25 different chargers for 25 different gadgets. So this is really not necessary. We're exploring the idea of a take-back scheme for old phones, tablets, and chargers. And again, I challenge all of you to open your drawers and probably find a few of these things lying around there. Shouldn't be, they're really wasted resources. So these are some of the ideas that we want to address here. Similarly, very quickly now, packaging and packaging waste. We have created, we are using enormous amounts of packaging in Europe and worldwide. In 2017, we had a sad record of 173 kilograms of packaging waste per inhabitant. This is really as unsustainable as it gets. It's very much linked to the issue of marine litter. Many of these packages you find out in our oceans. So we're looking at new requirements to reduce packaging waste and again, to drive the design for reuse and recyclability and the uptake of recycled content. Plastics, and now the story repeats itself. We already have a plastic strategy where we have looked at the entire plastic value chain from the use of plastics to the, well, actually not from the use, from the design of plastic products to the use of products to their waste phase. We have legislated on single-use plastic and fishing gears, focusing on those items that we find in our oceans and that are responsible for the marine litter problem we have. We're now going further and looking at more specific plastics, biodegradable, bio-based plastics and what to do with them, and at intentionally added microplastics, which are possibly an avoidable environmental problem. So we need to work further on that. Textiles was another value chain. I mentioned, again, a shocking figure on the right, only 1% of textiles worldwide are recycled. So again, here we find the textile industry really incredibly interested in addressing its footprint, in working with government, in working together across the value chain to say, well, how can we become more sustainable? How can we become part of that story? Less waste and more value. I think it's a bit of a no-brainer. Whenever we talk about waste, the best thing we can do is avoid waste in the first place. In order to do that, we're looking at specific waste reduction targets.
Astrid, you have 1 minute, I'm sorry.
Perfect. We're looking at specific waste reduction targets. We're looking at extended producer responsibility schemes and how we can make those more effective. I already mentioned transforming waste into high quality and safe resources. So we need to still sort of help this market to take off, create an understanding that these waste-based secondary resources can be sustainable and safe by design. And standards are one way that can help with that. And we want to address waste exports. I have already mentioned it. And maybe I close by saying all of this towards a global circular economy. I've mentioned that before. We don't want to do it on our own. We can't do it on our own. We would like to reach out to others, work with others, exchange experience, best practice on regulation, on bringing companies together, what have you. We have written a whole paper entitled Leading the Way to a Global Circular Economy, State of Play and Outlook, easily available on our website, which tells you what we want to do. Part of that is the Global Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency Alliance, just launched in February, the Global Plastics Agreement I've mentioned. And yes, I leave it at that. And lastly, we need to monitor what we do, otherwise it doesn't get measured, doesn't get done. Sounds stupid, but it's true. So we are also looking at upgrading our monitoring framework. And we have stakeholder platform, bringing all stakeholders together. And that was it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. And I think the last points we will take them up at the discussion and further discuss the global implication of the EU circular economy policy. And explore the specific implications for Israel. So I would like to give the floor now to our second distinguished speaker, Mrs. Rita Schwarzel-Zutter, a Parliamentary State Secretary of the Ministry of Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety of the Federal State of Germany. She will speak on the green transition in Germany. Rita, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, experts, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak about and to discuss about circular economy, as well as the crucial role of the European Green Deal in shaping regulation in Germany. And today the world is still far away from reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda for the Sustainable Development, as Astrid described this very well. Nevertheless, at the same time, we can see a rising political momentum. This week, the Climate Leaders Summit is taking place on invitation of President Biden. Hopefully, countries will make relevant pledges and propose NDCs that are more ambitious. We need that. Of course, we welcome that the US rejoined the Paris Agreement. This will facilitate the preparation for the COP26 in Glasgow. Climate protection needs international cooperation. Israel and Germany have a long-standing cooperation in environmental and climate protection. We cooperate bilaterally and within the framework of various EU twinning projects. And I very much hope that we will continue this extremely fruitful cooperation. Climate policy at the European level has a fundamental effect on national policy making, and the European Green Deal is a blueprint for a modern, sustainable and climate-friendly EU economy and society. Germany welcomes the clear guidance provided. A centerpiece of the Green Deal is the EU's objective to become climate neutral by 2050. The transition to a climate neutral society is both an urgent challenge and an opportunity to build a better future for all. If we want to create a long-term sustainable growth as well as resilient societies, it is necessary to switch to a green and climate-friendly inclusive economic model. The overarching goals have to underpinned by short to medium-term climate measures. These provide certainty for industries as well as time for adaptation. We are very contented that EU member states agreed on increasing the 2030 climate target to at least 55%. The European Commission is now preparing the so-called Fit for 55 package, which shall align European policy instruments for climate and energy with the new target. The German government supports the European Green Deal as well as the ambitious climate targets for 2030 and 2050. They are necessary to respond to the climate crisis. They are important for the modernization and competitiveness of the European countries and economies. Now we need to implement this agenda in a socially just and technical feasible way. All member states and all sectors of the economy will have to contribute to this effort. And the role of a circular economy is crucial. There is a strong link between climate protection and resource conservation, covered by SDG 8 and 13. Unsustainable consumption and production patterns cause about 90% of biodiversity loss and 50% of carbon emissions. We need a more economical use of finite resources. Circular economy covers product design and considers all phases of the life cycle. I welcome the EU Council conclusions on the Circular Economy Action Plan. As it presented, the EU is working on the creation of a new framework for a sustainable product policy, as well as on measures to reduce waste and strengthen recycling. We need to improve the longevity of products. We need common European rules on sustainable packaging design, the export of plastic waste to third countries, and the further development of secondary raw materials markets in the EU. All member states are in favor on further strengthening separate collection systems, more investment in sorting and recycling facilities, and an end to the landfilling of untreated municipal waste. Digitization will play a crucial role. However, it is a two-edged sword. On the one hand, it can considerably increase efficiency along supply chains or help decarbonize the mobility and building sector. On the other, it causes a considerable increase in energy consumption. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to speak about three aspects of the German policy. First, in 2019, we adopted a climate protection package to achieve the climate target for 2030. The overarching goal for Germany is to be climate neutral by 2050. To achieve this, our law contains a mechanism to tighten up existing policy instruments where necessary every year. Climate protection is not a static project, it is a dynamic process. A second aspect is the decarbonization of the energy sector. Germany is already in the midst of the energy transition and will phase out coal completely by 2038 at the latest. We have already considerably reduced our share of coal in the energy mix. By side, we also phase out of nuclear power. In order to foster inclusivity and social buy-in to the Coal Phase-Out Act, Germany decided to set up the so-called Commission on Growth, Structural Change and Employment. It covered a wide range of representatives, public officials at a federal and regional level, NGOs, trade unions, scientists, and think tanks, as well as representatives from the private sector. Phasing coal-fired power plants is the first central step towards neutrality. Finally, yet importantly, we are also implementing several measures and programs in the area of resource efficiency. One example is the German Resource Efficiency Program Progress 3, which pursues the goal of largely closing material cycles. A secure supply of raw materials is essential for the German economy. The targeted development and further establishment of resource efficiency plays a central role. The guiding idea is to make economic and production methods in Germany less dependent on primary raw materials. A systematic transition to a circular economy that minimizes the inputs of resources as well as the generation of waste must be done together through international partnerships. Decoupling economic growth from resource consumption is not simply an option. It's key to reaching our climate and biodiversity goals as well as the SDGs. This bears a potential for innovation for the private sector. Logistics, collection, separation, and recycling of used materials have to enable circular economy models. I'm very much looking forward to the statements of the Israeli colleagues, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Schwarzer-Sutter. And now our next speaker will be Mr. Yuval Laster. Yuval is the Director of Policy. Yuval, are you with us? Thank you. The Director of Policy and Strategy Division at the Ministry of Environmental Protection. in Israel. He will discuss the circular economy on the Israeli agenda of the Ministry of Environmental Protection. Thank you, Yuval, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Or, and thank you for inviting me to speak with this distinguished panel. It's always an inspiration to hear the developments happening in the EU and Germany, and we in many ways follow your steps, especially in all relation to carbon neutrality and circular economy. I was asked by O to specifically discuss issues or major developments in circular economy in Israel that happened in the past year, and I will share with you a short presentation. Just let me know when you see it on your screen.
You see it fine? Just put it in presentation form.
Okay, just a second. Okay, so I will start with mentioning a fact that probably a lot of you know, that Israel was one of the first countries in the world that managed to actually create a circular economy when it came to wastewater treatment. So since the 70s and the 80s, and even today, Israel is the leading country in relation to a circular economy when it comes to water, when more than 85% of our wastewater is being treated and then being used for agriculture. So there is a lot of experience that was gathered in Israel in that sector, and we're trying over the years to bring it to other sectors in relation to materials, waste, etc. In the past year, even though it was a Corona year, we can still mention four major developments in relation to a circular economy. I will speak about specifically the municipal solid waste strategy that our ministry led in the past year towards a circular economy in 2050 in that stream of waste. I can also mention the extension of the deposit return scheme in relating to drinking bottles. And Oz will speak just after me, I believe, on other major developments in relation to the operation of the Israel Resource Efficiency Center and the very interesting initiative related to industrial symbiosis. I will focus on the first two developments. Really shortly, I will say that when we started the strategy in Israel, looking at our waste situation management, there was a very big gap between us and the EU. As you can see, even to this day, 80% of our waste is being landfilled in Israel, while the EU average is around 20% of landfilling. In Israel, we still suffer from a dramatic increase in waste. The waste is being every year is getting more and more. So if we look at the 2030 forecast, we're looking at a 25% increase, which is something that is unlike what's happening currently at the EU and even in the past year at the EU. When we looked on the figures, we saw that in the EU, there is a 1.4 decline rate in the production of waste, while in Israel, we see an average a 2.6 increase in waste. And even when we take it to a per capita level, we see a significant gap between Israel and the EU that must be narrowed down. This is partly because of the population growth, but not only that, that's not the only reason. So on this steady state of affairs, we developed a strategy that aims to narrow this gap. I will also mention that when it comes to recycling, the EU average, the current EU average is around 46%, while in Israel we're talking about a mere 14%. So there is a lot to be done in the municipal solid waste stream sector. So I'll just touch upon the goals that were the end of the strategic process that we went through. And we would like to see that by 2030, there won't be any untreated municipal solid waste landfilled, that 54% of our waste will be recycled, and that all organic waste will have the infrastructure for separation at source. And if we'll manage to meet these goals by 2030, only 20% of our waste will be landfilled. And I remind you that currently the situation is 80% landfilled. And we will be able to reduce 47% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And by 2050, we will be able to manage to reach almost 92% reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. So there is a lot of reasons why we should go through a better management of waste, but one of them is also the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, the waste strategy have several strategic principles that are in line with circular economy principles. So, of course, we're looking at staying in line with the waste treatment hierarchy, meaning landfilling as the worst or the lowest in terms of the hierarchy, and the reduction at source, the better way of dealing with waste. We are now in the preparation of a legislative framework law that will deal with waste, together with the twinning project that we're doing with the EU. We are looking at economic incentives, especially pay-as-you-throw schemes that will start to develop and launch in various municipalities in Israel. We will go through a second round of separation of at source collection. So we will have organic waste collected separately and recyclables collected separately. Throughout the strategy development, we used the EU policy as a reference. So we didn't look at New Zealand, Australia, the US. The EU was our reference when we established the MSW strategy. And of course, we're looking at a principle that are talking about proximity, meaning that we want to deal with waste closer to where it was produced. Transparency and cooperation. We're looking at how we can enhance the competitiveness in this sector and the innovation in this sector, and also using advanced regulation and lead by example, especially with various policies where the government is more buys more greener materials. So the next steps in relation to the MSW strategic endeavor, we're looking at now going into a 10-year MSW roadmap. And after we'll finish doing that, we are looking at starting to do similar strategies to other streams, especially the construction and demolition stream, and also agriculture waste. So after we'll finish with these three major waste streams, I believe we will be able to say that we will have a more holistic circular economy strategy in Israel. I'll just also share a very quick note in relation to the DRS extension, the Deposit Return Scheme extension. So by the end of this year, there will be an extension in the deposit return scheme where all sizes of drinking bottles will be covered under the DRS law. And just yesterday, we had a very interesting roundtable in relation to the question how we can really close the loop when it comes to recycling various drinking bottles. Yesterday, we looked at the PET plastic, and how we can start creating a more sustainable industry around this recycling system. We're happy to say that since the DRS law came into force, two new companies are planning to build their facilities that will create rPET. And we basically want to see how less PET is being landfilled, is being recovered or downcycled, but rather will go back into its original form, and instead of PET, it will become an rPET, and then we will be able to even create the same bottles with just a recycled material. So these are some observations from my side on the major development in the circular economy in Israel, and I hand back the floor to you, O.
Thank you very much. So you're all very punctual, and we're even before actually time. So I think we will have a really nice long discussion at the end. At this point, I would like to call on our fourth distinguished speaker, Mr. Oz Katz. He is the Deputy General Manager of Industries at the Ministry of Economy in Israel. He will discuss the circular economy and green growth agenda at the Ministry of Economy. Oz, the floor is yours.
Hi. Hello all, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Oz Katz, and I am a Deputy Director General of the Industries Administration. My administration actually are focusing on the growth of the industry, and we have a lot of activities in order to assist the industry in Israel to develop. One of our main programs are around the circular economy. We have a very good relationship and partnership with Yuval and the Ministry of Environmental Protection. We are in a few months going to launch a program for a circular economy. We also, as the ministry, understand that it's a very main driver for the industry and for the market to growth. We actually recently adopt a ministry goal for circular economy that our minister decided to adopt, and we're going to promote this program, and we're going to bring it also for budget in the next few months. So let me please share with you our plan in a very wide perspective. 1 minute. Okay, you can see it's okay?
It's fine, just change to presentation mode. Thank you.
Okay, so as a goal, we understand that the circular economy aims to maintain the value of products, materials, and resources for as long as possible by returning them into the product cycle and the end of their use, while minimizing the generation of waste. So this is a sentence that we actually allocated the goals of our plan and the programs in order to meet this vision. Part of the projects already, we launched them, and there are activity in the market, and we have a very good result. And part of our programs going to be launched very soon. So, for example, I want to share with you some interesting projects. So, one of the projects are industrial Symbiosis. We understood, as also Yuval presented in his presentation, that we have a lot of waste that going into dumping, and we're not doing them any other use. So we actually divided the country into few areas, and in each area we have operators that allocated all the waste from the industry, from the municipality, from agriculture, and from the commercial market, and try to allocate those waste and to find for them a client in a different place in the country. So each operator that you see here in the slide need to map more than 1,000 clients in a year for waste that doesn't have any address, and we don't achieve from them any economic and environmental value that go into dumping, and we are trying to find those linkage by this program. So we had a pilot last year, and the goals was fantastic. We found a lot of project that the waste went into generation of production. We have a lot of examples. And this year we launched it for another 5 years, and we did a partnership also with the Ministry of Environmental Protection. They are joining us this project, and we are aiming to allocate more than between 30 and 40 million dollar direct benefits from this project, which prevent around 450,000 tons of landfill. So in addition to those projects, we also did a partnership with the Innovation Authority in Israel, where there are some waste and streams that don't have any value, and we didn't find a solution for them. We are trying to do it with the Innovation Authority. So this is a very interesting project that we are mapping all the waste in Israel, and we're trying to find for them a solution. And in the end, or during this few years, we want to open it also for open source, so people can find the waste that nobody use and going for dumping, to use it for a different usage. So this is a very interesting projects that are already launched. And the other project that launched is we understand that in the industry, the efficiency of materials are not so high. So we opened a resource efficiency center where we actually build two places, two areas of focus. One is National Knowledge Center. We also partnership with this project with the Environmental Protection Ministry, because we understand that it's not only the benefit of innovation and to efficient processes in the industry, there are also a very strong impact of the regulation of the government. They need to allow the change of a circular economy and to reduce the resource efficiency. So this project is around 60 million shekels, and we operate a national knowledge center which build guides for the industry, professional specification, and industry training for the managers in the ministry, workshops, and so on, and training. We have already more than 100 companies, manufacturers that enjoyed from this center that was launched just last year. So this is through the National Knowledge Center. We also understand in order to achieve a change, we need to focus on doing a specific program for the company or for the manufacturer in order to support them through the change of resource efficiency and circular economy. So the first stage is actually to map the potential and the areas where the manufacturer can improve their resource efficiency and where they can adopt recycle of processes. This mapping for the manufacturer is by our expense. The government is paying for this stage. After understanding the area where the manufacturer can improve their processes, we subsidize the processes by between 50% and 70% in order to attract them to the change. And in this area, we have also more than 100 companies, manufacturers that did the change already. The impact that we are want to see is one on an environmental side, where the impact on pollutions are reducing and materials are reducing. And the other side, the economic benefit of increasing the productivity of the manufacturer. So this is a different and more additional project that launched also last year in the concept of circular economy of the Ministry of Economy, where we want to do a change in the market. Another challenge that we are gonna launch very soon is we call it as a community. We have in our ministry 10 different communities for different areas like agriculture and water and health and food and so on. And we decided that we're going to launch very soon a community for circular economy. The goal of this community is we are actually paying for a portion of this community, which need to connect between the different manufacturers and consultant and R&D companies and stakeholders that have an interest in the circular economy. We're going to put them around a program and one table. This community will have a manager, and we're going to achieve the national goal faster by launching this community. In other communities that we have in the ministry, the goals are very good and the achievements are great. We need to understand and not forget that one of the big challenges is the awareness of the clients and the customers that need to also purchase a type of certain products. And this is also one of the goals of the community. We did a very interesting process with manufacturers in Israel. We divided each manufacturer in different sectors. What are the preparation for circular economy? And by these interesting projects that we had, we now have additional insights that what of each sector need to be done in order to launch, in order to promote the circular economy. So these are the main sectors that we're going to focus on. It's construction, packaging, chemistry, and electronics. On each one of them, we have a specific programs that we are about to launch. Another tool is supporting by funding programs by the ministry and the Innovation Authority of promoting a circular economy concept and R&D into the products. So we are going to launch a very specific program for this purpose. And it's going to be also soon in the next few months after we are going to have first a government. As everybody knows that we are in a time that we don't have a stable government, and then a budget. And we're also going to launch and support in this program supporting of circular pilots, where we have a very interesting concept or R&D idea, and we need a place where we need to support a pilot for achieving the commercial stage. And this is going to also support this type of companies and efforts. So our goal of our program going to focus on knowledge supporting project. Circular design is a certain area. Industrial symbiosis, as I just mentioned in the beginning of the presentation. Standardization to allow circular economy, regulation that will be enabling, and collaboration and circular procurement. All of them are a different chapter in our program. That's going to be probably in the next few months. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Oz. That was intriguing. A lot of new information, I think, from you as well. I definitely have some questions I'd like to ask you for the discussion, and we will do so later. But lastly, our last speaker of the day is also a dear friend, Professor Sandra Eckert from Aarhus Institute of Advanced Studies in Denmark, and also Goethe University of Frankfurt, Germany. And she will provide us some insights on the external dimension of the EU Green Deal. Sandra, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aura, for putting this fascinating panel together. And it's great that we are ahead of time. So Aura allocated even more time for me. I'm not sure I want to use it because I'm sure that you also would want to engage in a conversation. The greatest temptation I have now, because I'm an EU scholar interested in policy making and environmental policy in particular, in circular economy in particular, plastics in particular. So I would just love to talk to Astrid on nitty-gritty details, but I won't do so, so be assured. What I'd like to do instead is really to take a bit of a more sort of an bird's eye perspective, and reflect on the four really rich presentation on circular economy, link them a bit to the wider also international environmental policy agenda. And I would like to focus on three issues. The first one is about goals. So what do we commit to in terms of substance, in terms of course, climate change goals in particular. So what do we want to do? The second is about instruments. How do we want to achieve that? What are the means? And the third one, of course, is about this also external dimension. It's not only about the effects, like how is Israel or other third or trading countries of the EU, how are they being affected by the Green Deal, but also how can we cooperate? Because we need, as we know, go beyond the national and also go beyond the European scope of action. I mean, first of all, we know that the carbon reduction is still a really pressing issue. We have thought during the lockdown, in the first moment, we might see a reduction, but we have the highest emission ever this year, and we don't have a positive COVID effect. So there's still the climate emergency in addition to the COVID emergency. So there is a need for action. I think all of you have really highlighted this. As we know, the EU is coming up with a climate law later this year. We commit at the EU level to low carbon and resource efficient economy. So it's really both circularity and decarbonization. We want to have zero carbon by 2050. We also have good news that, for instance, China has committed to the same goal by 2060. We have linked, as we did in the past, environmental objectives to a growth strategy. So even before COVID, the Green Deal proposed by Ursula von der Leyen was a green growth strategy. So the COVID-19 gives it extra momentum, but it doesn't change sort of in a way its logic. And we see now a very intimate link, of course, with Next Generation EU and the commitment of 30% of greening and these things. Also at the national level in Germany, as was presented by Mrs. Schwarze-Löhr-Sutter, we have really binding commitments with the climate change law in 2019. So Germany has committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 55% in 2030, and of course is aligning to the EU goal of net zero or greenhouse gas neutrality by 2050. We also know we have this phase out of nuclear energy. And for instance, I saw in the chat a question on this, how we can achieve that. You've also pointed to digitalization, increasing energy need, right? So we really face a challenge here, of course, in increasing energy consumption, while at the same time really trying to have this massive switch to renewable energy, and also, of course, to some extent still importing energy. So there's a few issues there as well. We also have, as discussed, a strong commitment to circular economy, of course, in close alignment now with the 2020 action plan, which Astrid has presented in great detail. So again, there's also this intimate link of decoupling growth, this intimate link of decarbonization and circularity. I also really like the presentation by our policymakers from Israel and Yuval, like you have illustrated how Israel is trying to improve the waste management. I think that was a very honest presentation in a way to sort of show that there's much to be done on recycling and landfilling, but also at EU level, although we seem to be like really a very good pupil in this respect, we have huge, massive problems there still, also in terms of the national waste legislation to align and to reduce landfilling and increase recycling, as we know. There's also commitment, of course, in terms of carbon reduction, and you have a green growth strategy. So there are quite a few similarities between the three sort of examples of the green transition here. So in terms of the goals, that was my first point, I would like to ask all of you, of course, to reflect, do you think these goals are ambitious enough, really focusing on the sustainability and the environmental aspect, or is there more to be done, and where do you see the sort of the most drastic shortcomings, where is there most urgency to act? And I'd also like to pick up a few comments and reflections from the chat, where one of the questions was about the social aspect of this. I think Ms. Schwarzer-Sutter has made this connection and said it must be sort of socially acceptable. Of course, we know at the EU level, we have this just transition idea. So it is really an important discussion also at the moment around the green taxonomy, how we make this transition socially and also economically acceptable. So I think I would invite all of the panelists to reflect a bit on these three pillars again of sustainability. I mean, it's of long standing. It's like the classic when we talk about sustainable development. We have this environmental pillar, we have the economic pillar, and we have the social pillar. And ideally, we see there's a win-win, but oftentimes we really need to address also trade-offs. And one of the ideas, which also I think showed up in the chat, is of course when we reduce waste, for instance, it also means reduce consumption. And if we are a bit more drastic about it, we could think about degrowth and also less consumption, which of course is not in line with the green growth idea. And of course, all of you are aware that there are also these more radical views about a sustainable transition. So maybe you could also reflect on these. But let me move on to the instruments. So my second point, how do we achieve it? I think all of us know very well that one of the key instruments in environmental policy thus far is, of course, regulation. Oftentimes it's command and control instruments. Astrid has demonstrate or illustrate one example, or we have one recent example at EU level, which is the Single-Use Plastics Directive, where we take certain products from the market. So it's sort of the most drastic, most visible thing we can do. We ban certain products, but we also see we have many other instruments at hand. And as I see it, at least, there's some change ongoing. I mean, the first thing that we are trying to do, and I think that was very clear in the first presentation, is the mainstreaming idea. So we really want to have this decarbonization and the circularity in all the policies. And that is already, as you know, you work in ministries, you work in administration, is quite difficult to do across the departments already at national level and even more so at international level. Then I also see a shift towards economic instruments. So we discuss issues such as CO2 pricing, and that was introduced in Germany. It is discussed by various countries at the moment, but also at international level could be a possibility. We have emission trading scheme at EU level, but also a CO2 trading scheme, for instance, in Germany. So I see a shift towards make more use of these economic instruments. One could maybe also argue that, especially now with COVID-19 and this massive public investment that we need to keep the economy going, we could also see a shift towards stronger public intervention. And I'd like to hear your views on that through investment, of course, but also through setting new frameworks, such as the green taxonomy. we also see that new type of actors play a role. So at the European level, we have a new climate bank, so to speak. We have the European Investment Bank playing a key role. We have the European Central Bank committing to climate change and these goals in monetary policy. Christine Lagarde being very vocal on this. Also some so different viewpoints, of course, across countries. We have a role for supervisory authorities, so the idea to also integrate sustainability ideas, for instance, in the area of banking supervision. And the last point, and this was mentioned by all of you, a strong involvement of industry. I think in the first presentation, Astrid said there was first also some opposition from industry, but by now it seems more like a partnership, although we also know that certain ideas such as EPR, extended producer responsibility, are of course for industry also a bit, there's always a bit the concern about costs and responsibilities and these issues, but we see a strong role, and I think that is true for all three examples. We have seen also, I think, especially in the Israeli case, I'm not an expert and I hope I don't say anything stupid about environmental policy in Israel, but it seems to me that the partnership with industry is really important also in Israel, and that at this stage also voluntary instruments are a key instrument you use. So I think my questions here would be, would you agree that we currently see a shift from, say, regulation and even command and control instruments towards economic instruments? What is your viewpoint on voluntary instruments? I mean, there was also some sort of trial at EU level, but sometimes it was quite difficult to implement. And do you see a new role or different role also for public intervention to really steer this process? Because as we know, this green transition is a very encompassing, it is a very ambitious transition of society, of economy, and of policy making, of all of this. And I think also in terms of the other goals that we also have apart from the green transition, and this has been mentioned in the chat, is also how we link this process to the digitalization. I think it popped up in a bit in the first presentation also, and Rita said it's a double-edged or two-edged sword, right, with increasing energy use, but also certain things you can achieve through digitalization. So I think that would also be a question I think we could address in our discussion to pick up on the comments that were made in the chat. Now, let me come to the third point of how can we do this together? How can we cooperate? How can we go beyond the European and really have an international cooperation that works? I would be curious, for instance, to hear a bit more about these recent initiatives of the European Commission, such as the Global Agreement on plastics. How could that work? Would it mean we commit to goals again, or would it also mean that we have certain instruments that, such as restrictions for products? That would, of course, be a very innovative measure at international level. I don't think probably we could see this type of measure. I mean, overall, we know we have favorable conditions at the moment. We are quite happy with the new US, with the outcome of the US election, the new administration, and we also see China is committed. So I think there is a momentum here. So I think, again, my question would be, do we need new instruments also at the international level of cooperation? Could we envisage something like a CO2 price, or maybe a green taxonomy? Maybe, I guess the European hope would be to export the European model, as we did in the case of REACH. That REACH chemical regulation might be something that, for instance, Israel will surely be affected because it exports quite a substantial amount of chemicals to the EU. So could the EU here be a leader, or should we rather also try to be more of, have more of a partnership on these aspects? And I think one question that also came up in the chat is really whether COVID-19 gives all of this additional momentum, or whether the green ambition is sidelined by the economic recovery. So I think, is the climate emergency even more pressing now, or has it a bit lost its salience? And I hear very different viewpoints on this. Some of them like making a close connection also with biodiversity and the outbreak of the pandemic, and others saying, well, now we first have to have economic recovery, and also on certain aspects, like for instance, the green taxonomy, slow it down a bit, do the economic recovery first, and all these things that you need to do before, rather than being over ambitious on this. So I think that would be a question also I'd like to see us discuss in on our virtual panel. I think I stop here for the moment. I'm sure I have forgotten certain points, or we can pick up on certain also comments from the chat in more detail. So thank you again, all of you, and I look forward to hearing your comments and reactions.
So Sandra, thank you very much. I think you've quite overwhelmed our speakers with the points that you have remembered. So what I suggest is that we have kind of a brief comment by each of one of our four first discussants. And then we might bring up some additional questions or specific questions to each and every one of you, but you are free to take up any one of the points that Sandra has just brought up. So Astrid, may we start with you? Please, just unmute.
Sorry. Yeah, I didn't manage. So yes, I think the difficulty is the word brief comment, because Sandra has been pushing out so many questions and all very worthwhile. So to try and react to all three elements, goals, instruments, and the external front. I think our goals, well, are they ambitious enough? We have the Sustainable Development Goals. This is a global set of goals. And I think the world has come together in an understanding that if we were to achieve those goals by 2020, we would truly be on a path towards global equity, sustainability, etc. So combined with what we know we need to do to bring climate change under control, and what we know we need to put in place to address biodiversity, I think the goals as such are not so much the problem here. What is more challenging in this debate, and you have mentioned, or others have mentioned, is taking everybody along. So in the lingo of the UN, leaving no one behind, and how to do that in practice. So that is a bit. Get the microphone a bit closer. Sorry, that is more difficult. And you have mentioned in the European Union we have the idea of a just transition fund. So it is certainly, I think, from our perspective, very important that we communicate honestly. So yes, it is a global transition. It is a transition of a magnitude that we have not seen in our generation or in past generations. And it's something we do not want to happen by accident, but it is a transition we want to steer in a certain direction because we know what needs to be done. And because we know, we also have a fairly clear understanding that there will be winners and losers. That is also clear. If you are a coal miner today, in the transition towards renewable energy, you're not the one who will be immediately in a good position to benefit. But long term, you will, be it from a better job, from better health, be it from specific funding that needs to be made available. So our understanding is we identify clearly that there will be sectors, there will be regions that will not do immediately as well as others, and they need specific support, and that is what the Just Transition Fund is about. And that is, of course, also, and I'm sure Mrs. Schwarz-Sutter will say more about it, that is, of course, a lot then where the member states come in, because they have the understanding of their economies and of where those hotspots are that we need to focus on. Absolutely clear. At the same time, equally clear that the circular economy is a job creation engine as well. So we're looking, for example, at some 560,000 new jobs in the EU coming from the shift over to more recycling. And these are jobs that are high-tech jobs partially, but they're also basic jobs that do not require a lot of education, that are local jobs. So the kind of jobs that are needed in this transition. Second point, or another point you made, if we reduce waste, we reduce consumption. I think that is not necessarily true. This is about designing products differently. So we want to say that we have products, sustainable products on the market whose lifespan is longer, that can be recycled, that can be reduced, etc. I keep the degrowth question maybe for a separate discussion because that's very complex. On the instruments, I think the most important thing to bear in mind is we need all instruments and all actors. So yes, there is a part of command and control, and there needs to be. And in fact, even industry in many cases is asking for it, because otherwise the front runners are the ones that pay for everybody else. So yes, we think we need a legal framework, we need an enabling framework, but we also, and it's true, we're using economic instruments more and more, from the extended producer responsibility, but also taxation, of course, comes in, or also what you have mentioned, the taxonomy and many others. There is always a role for voluntary instruments. We encourage voluntary instruments. Very often they fall behind expectations, that we also have to say, but that doesn't mean that per se they are not valid, and it also doesn't mean that we cannot test certain approaches first voluntarily and then see if we want to upgrade them to a binding rule set. And doing things together, absolutely could not agree more. So we have a whole set of initiatives we want to roll out. The global plastics agreement, which you asked about specifically. So the idea here is that we in the European Union, we have a plastic strategy. Many other countries, including we've heard from Israel, are addressing the plastic sector as one that is responsible for one of our biggest environmental problems, which is marine litter. But can we actually achieve things by acting individually as one country or one group of countries? And we don't think that is the case. And the way in the environment area one looks at that, if you have a global problem, the idea is to come together in a global, legally binding framework where you set yourselves certain targets that you want to reach, and then come together in a discussion what it takes to reach these targets. So what are the policies? What could be the global standards? What is the best practice that that can be replicated elsewhere? What kind of financial mechanisms might also be needed to support poorer countries? So this is the kind of issues that we would like to see addressed in a global plastics agreement. And yes, this would only be one part of a global response. We also want to create a bigger space for conversation on circularity. That's what the Global Alliance on Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency is about. We think over time we need to go much beyond that. In the EU, there is the idea of a convention on resource use. I'm talking, I think, long distant future here, but it is clear that in a situation where resources are finite and unevenly distributed on the globe, at some point we need to have a discussion how we want to come to grips with it. So certainly also on our radar screen, and also the taxonomy. Yes, it's one of the economic stimulants that we put forward. So we are making an effort to identify what are green, truly green investments at a fairly granular level. And we're doing that for the EU, but we've also created a new sustainable finance platform, an international platform, where we're working with other countries to see what the interest and the uptake of such an idea is. Not so short, apologies.
That's fantastic, thank you. And Mrs. Schwarz-Zuta, please, you have the floor for some comments and responses.
Thank you very much. And I will start, our goals are ambitious enough. And I think in comparison with the situation of our planet, I think they are not ambitious enough, but they are ambitious, and we have no time to lose. So therefore we have our German Climate Change Act, and especially that we have all sectors, every sector has a specific goal and have to reach every year this specific goals, make it clear that there is no time to lose, and there's a process to 2030, and we check it every year. And if they are not on the track, they have to improve their treatments. So with the view focus on circular economy, I want to emphasize there's a need also of regulatory and also of intensives. But we have in Germany a circular economy system over 20 years where we try to recycle plastics. Now we have just decided about an act and we want to accelerate the percentage of recycled materials in the sector. And if I think you can also give the enterprises an incentive, by the way, they have to pay more if they have, I say, worse, very worse packages, then they have to pay more. And if they have very climate-friendly and environment-friendly packages, they pay less. And I think there's also an economic factor and not an incentive, but an economic factor to push them forward to environmental friendly packages. So there are a lot of instruments, and I want to emphasize also when we talk about circular economy and landfilling, then landfilling is also an emittent of greenhouse gases. So if we can if you have some instruments to reduce these emissions, therefore we have in Germany the National Climate Initiative, and with this initiative, it's a support program. We also support communities, municipalities, if they have old closed landfillings, that they use they capture the methane and the greenhouse gases. That is also an incentive for the municipalities to manage the greenhouse gases of old and closed landfillings. And I want also say something about what do we with renewables, or when we phase out of coal energy. Yes, it depends also that we expand renewable energy and also support efficient energy technologies. We support also the economy, enterprises that day, and that's a really opportunity at that time when we talk about the Green Deal and the recovery plan, because this is the moment to invest in the right climate-friendly, environmentally friendly investments. We don't want that we have lock-in effects or lost investments. If we have now the economic stimulus package, then we should use this, and also the German economic stimulus package use this, that we support climate-friendly investments. And I think with these investments, we can also modify the path to the 2030 goals, and perhaps we can use this to that we are better in 2030 than we plan now. At last, climate, how we can cooperate. I think we have, as the German government and the BMU, a long cooperation with international cooperation, and our instrument, our measure is the International Climate Initiative. That's not only a support program for climate technologies, also we especially support developing countries in their circular management, in their circular and also in other areas. And we have also the OICI, the European Climate Initiative. And I think we have a lot of experiences collected, and I think it works very well.
Thank you very much. Yuval, would you like to take the floor and make some responses, some comments?
Yes, I will try. I'll try to do it without a camera, with your permission, and just say two major challenges that we're now looking upon, both when we're talking about going to a circular economy and to a more carbon neutral economy. The first will be related to economic incentives. And as mentioned by previous speakers, it's when coming into economic incentives, it's crucial that these steps will be taken globally. It's really hard for a single country to come up with a tax or another economic instrument that burdens the industry, while other countries, of course, does not share the burden, so to speak. And in this sense, the EU, as a leader over the year with the EU ETS systems, and more lately, several carbon taxes being implemented in some European nations, is taking, I believe, the right step when it comes to the border adjustment tax initiative that the EU is now promoting. And here in Israel, we are observing this initiative very closely, and just yesterday we had a meeting with the EU colleagues mentioning that by June there will be some more information about the border adjustment tax of carbon, and I think that this is will be definitely something that will help us here at the Ministry of Environment to push through a carbon pricing mechanism for Israel. The second point that I also want to highlight as a challenge, and I'm not sure it was mentioned by other speakers, but I think it's highly important, is working with the financial sector. And here in Israel, we just recently launched a very ambitious plan to work with the 4 financial regulators in Israel to see how they implement and incorporate in their decision-making plans when it comes to credit and insurance, and how they implement the circular economy ideas, as well as reducing carbon emissions. So these two challenges I want to highlight, and I think they're very relevant to Israel-EU relations. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you very much. Oz, the floor is yours if you'd like to make some comments.
Hi all. So thank you. Actually, I think the point of view that we are trying to implement is more a practical through the industry and the market, how to enhance the implementation of circular economy by specific programs. I want to mention the 2 sectors that we have, 3 sectors that we have a big challenge that we are trying to figure out how to promote the goals of circular economy. One is the plastic sector. Israel producing more than 1 million tons of plastics each year, and just around 20% of them is for 80% of them are going to dumping. And on the other hand, we have big plastic companies in Israel that actually importing this recycled plastic from overseas, from EU and the United States and other places. So we have a big challenge how to improve the recycling of plastic in Israel in order to allow those companies to use this plastic and not to import into Israel waste from outside of the country. This is one big challenge that is related to infrastructure and also to innovation. We are investing a lot of budgets into innovation, also in plastic innovation, how to improve the recycling of plastic. This is a big portion of our focus in circular economy and the program. The second sector that it's very challenging in Israel is the construction sector. Israel is small. I don't know if you all pay attention for that. And we don't have a lot of materials for the construction sector. We are building each year more than, well, we have the numbers. It's more than 100,000 apartments, and the infrastructure is increasing each year. And we don't have the materials. But on the other hand, most of the waste of the construction sector is also going to dumping in the better option. In the worst option is going into in the nature or in areas in Israel that it's not allowed. So we have a big challenge how to allow the waste from the construction sector to get back into this industry, and how to allow it by adjusting the standardization of the construction for recycling materials, and how to enhance innovation in the construction sector between to make very strong and good materials that are based on recycle waste of construction, and to allow them to get back to the infrastructure and the construction buildings and so on. So this is a very big challenge. We're doing it together with the Ministry of Construction in Israel and other ministries. And we're trying also, we're just about to finish the standard that allow for recycling materials into public infrastructure. We are doing we're going to finish the standard to allow this option. And then we're going to see a lot of the big construction companies use this type of waste. The third challenge that we are dealing is the energy sector. We all aware of the change of the energy sector that is from refineries and fossil fuel into new energy as clean energy, hydrogen, and so on. And we are just pushing the government in order to prepare our change in the next 20 years to adopt new energy for the country. We have a team together with the Ministry of Energy that dealing on one hand, what is the infrastructure that needed in order to allow this change, and on the other hand, how is innovation and the industry can enhance this change. Around the world are investments of a lot of billions of dollars in order to bring the breakthrough of clean energy, especially in hydrogen. And Israel should be part of this global trend, allowing our very good R&D strength in order to be part of leading this change. And this is the third sector that we are really interested in pushing it, and we have a team that's dealing with that. So just to give you an overview of a few more in-depth sectors that we are in the progress of changing their concept into a circular economy and low carbon economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Oz. So I think one of the clear points that was brought up along the discussion was the importance of international leadership, and especially the EU as an international leader in this area. And I'd like to ask Astrid specifically, so the idea of a sustainable product policy or a circular economy policy, but even a very specific sustainable product policy. how do you envision that being implemented outside of the EU? So obviously in the EU, I mean, the amount of leverage you have is much larger, but then a lot of what the EU uses today, production is done elsewhere, design is done elsewhere, resources are coming from outside the EU. And I think this begs the question of how is the long arm of the EU going to reach out to those countries and make sure that this type of policy would be implemented and monitored. And I think that would be of great interest to us in Israel as well. So I would be happy if you could address that question, maybe briefly, and then maybe the time would allow for just one or two more questions, and then we will finish up.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can give you an entirely satisfactory answer because we're now still at the stage of designing the policy. That's one point. The second point to bear in mind is our long arm is becoming shorter as our global importance on world markets, of course, is shrinking and other economies come to the fore, which makes it so much more important to engage with others and come to a common understanding of what constitutes a sustainable product. But the basic elements that we have in mind of our legislative framework is that we regulate what comes on the EU market. So with our consumers, we have done a lot of research, have said we want products that are durable, repairable, recyclable, etc. So we have said, well, we can legislate on that. And if anybody wants to put a product on the EU market, then it has to comply with the criteria that we have put in place. Now, this is not new. We've done it, for example, years ago in something called the Hazardous Substances Regulation, where we have said, I think it was mostly electronic products, a set of chemicals is not allowed to be put into these products if you want to put them in the EU market. This was quickly then copied by other market leaders. There was a similar law in China, in Korea, and elsewhere, and it became a global standard. And in a way, we hope this will also become a global standard. So we say this can go in our internal market, and then we reach out to discuss with other countries to say, how can we work with you? How can we engage you? What is your interest in having products that meet our requirements? Ultimately, this is not about EU consumers. It's about meeting global goals and targets, as was mentioned before. And that's also the carbon border adjustment that was brought up. Is the same reflection that this is a mechanism. This is a law we hope to be put out in a couple of months' time. But basically, it's a law we don't want to use. It's a tool we need because climate change is a global challenge. And we would be completely undermining all the efforts we make if producers would simply move their production to countries where there are absolutely no rules and no concern about carbon emissions. And then ultimately we have a tiny bit of production that is carbon friendly and a vast amount of global production that does not meet any global targets. And this would really be shooting ourselves in the foot. And that is the kind of reflections we're making. The important point is that we can make it in a way that is done in dialogue with third countries, and of course it's WTO compatible.
Thank you very much. I have a question to Mrs. Schwarz-Lozuta. So you mentioned the 2030 goal for climate neutrality or reducing climate emissions, sorry, for 2030. And also I would say the coupling of regulation as kind of an adaptive move for regulatory improvement, ongoing regulatory improvement. I think that's what you said. What I was wondering was, how do you create business certainty at the same time when businesses know that regulation can change yearly in order to be more effective in implementation? So I assume there's some kind of a trade-off between certainty of regulation on the one hand, and then the kind of adaptivity of regulation or the ongoing improvement of regulation. And I'm wondering how Germany is tackling that conflict.
Regulation doesn't change every year. but we have, especially for the economy, we have certainty because they know which CO2 price they can expect in this year, in the next year, in the sector which is in the national emission trade. We started, so they have a certainty how they can deal, and this is also an incentive to reduce their CO2. And I think that's very important. And with a view to the EU, now how we can implement the at least 55% goal, then it's important how we deal with the emission trade, EU emission trade, and also with the effort sharing regulation. So we started now national, and our economy has a certainty. And also we have now they have, we look what is with their competitiveness, and if they have difficulties and they belong to a sector. We have a carbon which have the risk of a carbon leakage, so we support them. But we support them very specific, so that we can help them, and also we try to push them forwards, because we want also when we support them that they also use in the time new efficient energy technologies. So there's a mechanism of regulation and also of support, but we have also the look, and I want to come back to just transition. What means this for consumers, especially with low income, when we begin and phase in with our national carbon price, then we know this will also affect households with low income, and therefore we say, okay, at the beginning we want to support, and we want that you have also the same opportunities to change, and that you can buy also an electric, for example, an electric car, but now it's not possible. So that we support them for a time, that we have a just transition. That's one example. So I think we have a good mix. We have certainty because we have clear regulations, and also we have a focus on carbon leakage risks and deal with them, and if it's affordable, then we support the economy. But also every time we want to change, we want the transformation, and I think it's not useful to support without also expectation that they use energy efficient technologies.
Thank you. So we've almost run out of time. I would like to just make maybe a last observation with regards to Israel, in saying that I think we've heard that Israel has taken quite a few steps in the past 2-3 years in trying to promote and advance both transition to low carbon economy, circular economy, and generally reducing Israel's carbon footprint. However, we still lack a general overarching policy and I would say clear policy goals. So very concrete steps have been taken, and I think those have been very well presented by our two speakers. And hopefully, I think maybe with those building blocks, Israel can now look forward to both a circular economy policy as well as the climate law that Ministry of Environment is trying to advance presently and has put forward for public comment just a day or two ago. But we need a lot of political will on the Israeli side to make this happen, and we do hope that from the EU, clear message will be given and delivered to Israeli leadership that this is the right way forward. So thank you very much to all our wonderful speakers for this interesting 2 hours. And I hope we do continue this discussion for fruitful cooperation for a better future for us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.